Are you leasing any equipment? There's rental leasing companies that lease equipment here. Or are there vehicles or vessels that are being transported through the area? And then, of course, if you're how you're using it and how you're storing it here, all of that can matter. So I'll give you an example. You could be a contractor, and you could be storing pipe fittings at your location, but they're not for intended use here. Well, how are you going to be reporting that, and how are you going, every purchase that you're making, how are you crediting that properly to how it's going to be allocated? That are you starting to see that it gets even more complicated than when you get into actual examples? The existence of your use tax is not generally well known by the public. They don't even know that it exists. And then there's a lot of different responsibility on who actually reports it and when at the point of sale, et cetera. And sometimes it's actually the consumer who's responsible for reporting it. So if you're doing a household addition, it could fall to you to report that tax. And of course, it's all dependent on self-reporting. Now this chart, and it's really hard again to see up on this screen, but what you see up here is essentially that all of the incorporated areas within the county charge 7.75% sales and use tax. And that means that they're collecting a half cent more than you are for local, some of them are local add-ons but they're all voted on by the public. Some of them are specific and some of them were for general fund use. Which made me start to think that the county may, at some point, want to consider doing at least a half-cent sales tax measure because your community at large is used to paying in every incorporated area within the county already a half-cent more. So it would not be unusual for them to pay that at a retailer that abuts an incorporated area. So that is a possibility that you may want to explore in the future. Now, even if you were to add a half-cent tax, remember, depending upon if it's a transaction and use tax, if it's a use tax, it may or may not get collected here. That's the part that would get sticky. I can't say to you, I can't look across the board and say, oh, you've received $1 million revenue in the past, you would receive X exactly in the future if you did 10% more sales, because it doesn't actually follow simply sales. It does follow on how it's used locally. So there's a range that I could give you. If you did 10% more volume of transactions, you could expect this range of additional revenue. Do you understand why? Okay. Because we could only estimate revenue, if the county should choose in the future to look at a general tax, I would really recommend that you not ask the voters for it to pay for a specific volume, say one county sheriff, someone's salary that's dependent on it, because it is going to vary. And sales and use tax can vary a lot in any given year. It can vary if the state is doing an ERAF, and it can also vary on whether or not a lot of it, if you're having a housing boom or any sort of construction, a lot of it could be use tax. And if that should turn around, you would see actually reduction in the amount that you would be receiving. So here are some considerations. The best case is that we could give you a very tight ballpark. The worst case is that you would actually end up seeing an insignificant amount of revenue. I think here you would actually see a fairly true, because you haven't had that much construction, I think it would be much more true than you would in other locations. You would have to go to the voters, and the voters would have to approve this at a regular election. And then with all proposed tax increases, you would have to really think about why you would be going there. And then the bottom line is that obviously we're in a climate that taxes are not necessarily all that favorable right now. But if you can show that it's going for something specific, usually the public is very supportive, and they do see it as good governance when they get to vote on what the actual tax is. Now I'm going to go ahead. I sped through this really quickly. I usually do this much slower, only because you had a chance to look at this in advance, and I know we're short on time today. I do want to answer any questions that you may have, and I'll also take any questions maybe that the audience may have on this particular topic. But I also want to talk to you a little bit about some of the problems that we see if we go forward and some of the opportunities with a sales and use tax agreement with the city of Ukiah. If the county should elect to pursue a sales and use tax, it's normal to do it as part of a complete annexation agreement. So it's only one revenue stream of many that you usually evaluate. You usually take a look at property taxes, TOT, any local add-on taxes. There's all sorts of things, real estate transfer fees. It's usually considered as part of the pre-annexation requirements when you go to LAFCO. Some of it is dictated by state law and some is not. In this case, we're trying to tease those out and afford the county and the city a way to do better land use planning by removing the fiscalization of land, at least in this component, so that if a large retailer is coming in, you can work cooperatively together, and instead of possibly providing too handsome incentives for any developer to choose one jurisdiction over another. In addition to that, it gives the city and the county ways to look not only at better land